Well, we are 1 week of Hard Knocks in the books, and I believe our next guest, John Machota, got a good shot of his back in the Jerry Jones press conference on the first episode. I think that was you, John. Did your friends call you and tell you, hey, I think that's your back on Hard Knocks?
There was one scene where Ben DiNucci was talking about the mojo moment to us, where kind of they had the group of reporters at, and some friends told me about that. I didn't notice it, but no, the times I noticed myself, I have my phone right in front of my face because I'm usually taking videos at practice because it's their only time that we can take videos all season long. So I literally take a video of just about every offensive play. Now I only post like 10 or 15 because I'm not going to post all the bad ones, but I thought it was funny that anytime I saw myself during practice, my phone was directly right in front of my face.
So, John, from that first viewing, I mean, we know Dak likes to cuss. Micah Parsons needs to be reeled in the best type of way. Ezekiel Elliott doesn't rep gifts very. I mean, like, what were the standout moments to you? Because there's actually a lot, to take away from that first episode.
I will say, having been at all those practices that were used in that first episode, probably Dak's language when he wasn't getting to do his normal reps before his shoulder even got strained. Just because, obviously when you're out there, you see him going through his reps, and if you don't know the rundown, you pretty much just go, okay, Dak's going to be in there when Zach Martin, Tyron Smith, and Lyle Collins are in there. And it was like he wanted to be out there even more, and I didn't sense at all from practice. And he certainly didn't say it the times that we talked to him out there. But then you see that footage and you're just like, whoa, like he really was upset about, getting 4 or 5 reps taken away from him. Like this is pretty wild. So that stuff, I love all this stuff in like the meeting rooms and stuff, whether it's talking about, Dak had a 575 on his GPS, or even Jerry talking to Jim Maurer, the head athletic trainer, about, where they stand with Dak, and of course Jerry eating his McGriddle and salting it and all that. But I'll be honest with you, when I first got out there the first day, so it had been that opening press conference, I said to multiple reporters, I was like, oh my God, they have this. That was my first Hard Knocks. I was like, they have this many cameras and this many people working out here. I'm like, how could you possibly miss anything? And that was just off of the stuff where we can be. We can't even be back by where they were riding the bikes, like all that. And so I set the bar pretty high, and I thought I exceeded it. Like I was amazed. I thought it was an excellent episode, and I wrote that. And there's some people that were critical of that. They didn't have any of that roster bubble guys, and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I want to hear about the stars. This team is very star driven. Like, I didn't think there was too much fat on that first episode. I thought it was really good.
I know they want to hear about the roster bubble guys, John, but this isn't like the Bengals with the Cowboys. Their roster bubble most years is pretty boring, isn't it?
For sure. And the other part of it is, it's like, it's hard for me even to, okay, so let's say they were doing the Chiefs, and you feel like as a Chiefs fan, you know everything about Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill because they're covered so well. That's cool. If they're best friends and they're wrapping presents for each other and they're doing things like that, like, I want to see that. Those are the players that matter. I don't care if you already know that they're best friends. Like, that stuff is like, that's the good stuff there. Frankly, and I'm not going to mention any names, but I don't care about like a 6th, 7th receiver that even if they were to, like, they're on the bubble, like, you're not going to get any playing time anyway over any of these guys. So it's like, so I'm missing out on like the call to your dad about like, yeah, practice was tough today. I'm fighting, but I'm on the bubble. Like, yeah, this isn't high school football. Like, this is the Dallas Cowboys. There's so many storylines with Jerry Jones, Dak's injury, Dak coming off of that contract, a new coaching staff that was terrible last year, a new defensive coaching staff. Obviously, you add in Micah Parsons, who has a huge personality. CeeDee Lamb has probably been one of the standouts, not just the Cowboys training camp, but like of all NFL training camps. Like, and you want to talk about roster bubble guys? Like, we just are going to have to agree to disagree on what makes a good television show. Yeah,
no, I'm with you. Having watched Hard Knocks in the past, I think a lot of that is probably to set up their cut eventually. Like, make you care and then swipe them off the team. But John, you had a really good interview with Will McClay that you dropped yesterday on The Athletic for those that are members. He provided a lot of great quotes, but what was maybe one or two things that stood out more so to you in having that conversation with Will McClay?
So, I mean, I've talked to Will several times over the years, on and off the record, and I felt like he was a little bit guarded on some of his responses when like some of the first questions I asked him, maybe a little bit shorter than I thought he was going to be. And when I asked him what excites him most about the team, he talked about how you can kind of just feel it, like when he's around the team behind the scenes and things like that, that like there's not a lot of talking going on. It's like they know, like last year was a disappointment, and there's just kind of this like quiet confidence, like we're not going to talk a big game or anything like that, even though it's going to be hard to keep that under wraps when you have Hard Knocks following you around. But I just found it interesting because he was saying that, and I felt like that's kind of how he was being, like, and I asked him about like, rookies that have caught his eye and veterans that have caught his eye. Like he gave me some stuff, but I also thought that he didn't want to put too much on any of these guys because I think they're fine with kind of in a way flying under the radar. I mean, Jerry said on the NFL Network when camp started, he compared playing the Bucs in week 1 to David, playing Goliath. And I was just like, yeah, obviously the Bucs have Tom Brady. They're defending world champions, but like, that's just not like Jerry to be like that. And Jerry has been like that in years past, like 14 and 16, kind of flying under the radar. Those are two of the best seasons that the Cowboys have had in the last decade. So maybe that's what they're adopting. Maybe that's what they're going by. But like I said, to do that, it's just going to be tough when Hard Knocks is there because they're going to catch every little thing that's being said.
Poor little old most valuable franchise in the world in any sport.
Those Davids.
Those Davids. Yeah, it's tough. Man, another David is Amazon.com. Have you guys heard about that company? I mean, come on, Jerry. It's so strange. All right, so Dak's injury, this shoulder, under his shoulder, whatever it is, how concerned should people be really? The Cowboys, when they saw this on Hard Knocks, fans may not know, the Cowboys are not the best about injuries when it comes to how much a guy's really hurt. A lot of it's 4 to 6 weeks. If I hear 4 to 6 weeks, he's out for the year. But how concerned should people be?
I get the concern with a medical staff not saying that it'll be a few days and ends up being a couple weeks and things like that. I was kind of thinking because the way that training camp is nowadays that it was going to be longer than a few days to begin with. So basically, what I'm getting at, I'm not that concerned. I think if it was bad, or if he had regressed at all, or it was more, it was a bigger deal, I don't think he would even have gone back out there to these previous 2 practices and thrown at all, let alone from ramping it up a little bit more from the day before that. So, it's because he said he's getting an MRI when he goes back to Dallas to get everything checked out. That was kind of like, the lightning rod, like headline type thing, particularly on Twitter. And then you take and throw a little gasoline on that fire for any of these, sports talk TV shows that we're all familiar with, and all of a sudden it can like snowball into something that's really big. I maintain that if on Sunday this Sunday coming up, they were playing the Bucs, Dak would be out there and he'd be playing. And if he has a little bit of pain, he has a little bit of pain. But I just don't see this as being something that, could it linger? Sure. But I just don't see a major reason for concern right now because, again, if they weren't throwing him at all and he was doing the same thing as on July 29th, which is the day after, July 28th is the day where he first felt it. If they on July 29th, like I watched all of that practice, and like even when he was taking snaps, he would toss it back to the centers with his left hand. He was doing nothing with his right hand when it comes to a throwing motion. For them to even let him back out there and start throwing to Amari and doing things like that, that told me all I needed to know. I just don't think this is a major concern. But that social media, those talk shows, things like that, they can take anything. And when especially it's the face of the franchise, the highest paid player in franchise history, if you ask 30 different experts to talk about it, all 30 aren't going to say it's nothing. You're always going to find 4 or 5 people like, I don't know, this is something that could linger. So that's kind of where we are. But for me, I don't think it's anything to be concerned about when we're talking about the season.
So last week was what it was, the Hall of Fame and all that. A lot of Cowboys flavor with the Hall of Fame ceremony and the game itself. And now tonight, the Cardinals preseason game number 2. And John, we're certainly not going to see a lot of starters or anything along those lines. But what are you on the lookout for, and what are you kind of expecting to see tonight?
For me, it's very similar to that first game in that it's these defensive rookies, particularly the guys that they drafted. And the number one guy for me, it will be Micah Parsons. I think he'll end up playing a little bit more than he did in that first game. So, he was all over the place in those two series. I think he gets more work in this one. So he's a fun guy to watch because not only in that game, obviously he recovers that fumble, but even in the practices out in Oxnard, he was just always around the ball. So he's number one for me. And then second round pick, Kelvin Joseph. He's in a battle to try and get a starting spot there on one of those outside corner spots, probably the left corner spot. And right now, I think it'll be Anthony Brown to start the season, especially going against Tom Brady and the defending world champions. But I think eventually Kelvin Joseph wins that job as the season goes along, and I think he's going to play a lot in this game. So I'll certainly have my eye on him. And then it's defensive tackle. To me, it's the weakest position on this team right now. You don't have Tristan Hill, so you have Neville Gallimore. They're certainly not going to play him the entire time. So it comes down to, what are you getting out of the draft picks? What are you getting out of Osa Odighizuwa? What are you getting out of Quinton Bohanna? Like, are you getting any pressure from them, especially when they're going against 2s and 3s and guys that aren't even going to make the team? Like, you get some push up front, because that position right there is one that I just think that they can do a lot of mixing and matching, but they just don't have a lot of pressure coming from that defensive tackle position right now, at least not on paper. So that's kind of the area there, because while you can sit there and talk about Ben DiNucci and Garrett Gilbert, like, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of what they do doesn't matter, because this season comes down to what Dak and the first team offense does, and those guys aren't going to be out there tonight.
What about Maurice Canaday? I mean, sat out last year for COVID, but he's maybe the guy that's creating a lot of unexpected buzz in camp.
Absolutely, I would say he's probably number one in terms of getting buzz that was unexpected going into camp. This is a guy that he signed a 1-year deal last year and was going to play, and then he opted out because of COVID. And you saw what he did, in some of his previous stops, and you're like, okay, I can see him being a contributor. But then you see him in camp, and then at that Rams practice picking off Stafford, and he's been their best playmaker out of the defensive backs in training camp practices. Like, he has really opened eyes. He's went from a guy that was probably a roster bubble guy to being a guy that there's just no way that they would cut Maurice Canaday now. Like, and he's going to get playing time. So I wonder how much he plays in this game, but if he does, certainly, people should be watching him, because it's one of those things where, obviously corner was one of their weaknesses going into this offseason. That's why they were trying, they wanted to draft Patrick Surtain. They wanted to draft J.C. Horn. But if Kelvin Joseph can keep coming along and Diggs can, do the second-year leap like it looks like he's getting off to, if you have Kennedy and Anthony Brown and Jordan Lewis, solid veteran players like that, like, corner might actually be pretty solid for them. So, again, though, I go back to defensive tackle. That's the one I'm keeping my eye on.
Is linebacker all of a sudden, I mean, it went into the year thinking about it might be a problem, but now, I mean, like, everybody expected to hear anything. I haven't heard a thing about Jabril Cox yet, and I don't think that has anything to do with him, but just because the other guy, like Keanu Neal, looks like he's adjusted well to it, and Van Der Esch and Jalen Smith are both healthy. Yeah,
for sure. There's been a lot of off seasons, I feel like, over the last decade that we've come out of them saying, like, linebacker is one of the strengths in this team. And this is another one where it looks like that, but obviously health factors in. It looks that way on paper because you're anticipating 17 games of Leighton Vander Esch, 17 games of Micah Parsons, 17 of Keanu Neal, and 17 of Jalen Smith. If you're getting that, then yeah, this should be a very good linebacker group, because I think they're going to mix and match a lot. Like, Micah Parsons isn't going to leave the field because they're just going to find there's just so many different ways they're going to use him. But like coverage-wise, third downs, that's where I think you see more Keanu Neal, Jalen Smith comes out, things like that. I think Leighton Vander Esch, if he stays healthy, I think he's going to return back to the player he was a couple years ago. And if that's the case, I mean, that's a first-round pick, and that's the guy that made a Pro Bowl his rookie year. So, without even mentioning Jabril Cox or some of the guys we've mentioned in previous years, like Luke Gifford or even Francis Bernard, like those top four guys, I mean, the other thing is, too, is like with a guy like Jalen Smith, like he won't be playing every snap. Like that was the expectation. That's why he led the team in tackles the last 2 years. So you'd think that would maybe keep him fresher. So the snaps he is on the field, he'll be even better than he has been the last couple of years. So they're in a good spot right now at linebacker. I mean, it's probably one of the strongest, but it all comes down to how they mix and match with those guys. And, for one, are they going to blitz them more? We've been asking for that for a long time out of the Cowboys, and they've been reluctant to do that. So if that's going to happen, yeah, this linebacker group could be really exciting.
John Machota, The Athletic. John, has anybody approached Jerry Jones that they're concerned about his salt intake?
But I haven't had a chance to be around him since that first episode aired, but I can't imagine that he hasn't heard from a lot of people about that. I mean, this is a guy that, he listens to local talk sports radio in Dallas. I mean, he hears the fake Jerry Jones that they do on the radio. I mean, he knows the stuff that's being said about him. And then certainly his family all watches it. I mean, the Cowboys is the entire family's life. And so I'm sure that he's heard a lot about it. I'm sure the next time he talks, whether it be on the radio or saw us out at practice, there will be jokes about it for sure. But I mean, yeah, that was wild. I think that there's probably already enough salt and sodium in a McGriddle, but apparently not.
Yeah, not for listen. If you're Jerry, you've lived a life of excess, so I assume that no one's probably ever stopped him before. John Machota of The Athletic. John, are you in Arizona, or are you still back home?
No, I'm back in Dallas. Kind of when you're figuring out your road trips and stuff for the season, you kind of weigh which ones are worth the best bang for the buck and that. And just the way Cowboys training camp's been, usually they start out those first couple games out in California, and then they play their second 2 preseason games back in Dallas, and those are generally the ones where you see more of the starters. So no Arizona for me, but they're coming back here after that game, and I'll be out there as training camp returns to the Star.
All right, John, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks a lot, man.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
All right, John Machota of The Athletic every week, usually on Wednesdays, but this week Wednesday was a little bit of